My name is Thomas Brooks, and 3 weeks of silence nearly broke me. I thought losing my hearing was the worst thing that could happen until I got it back. The very first words I heard at home were from my own daughter calling me that old burden. That single moment shattered everything I believed about family. But what she didn't know was that her cruelty gave me the perfect weapon: silence. While they thought I was deaf, I was listening, and every word became part of a plan that would change our lives forever. Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear even more powerful stories like this one. 3 weeks of deafness had taught me to live in silence, to move through days without the rhythm of sound. When my hearing returned, I expected joy, relief, maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was betrayal served cold in my own kitchen. I walked through the front door of my house ready to surprise Jessie, my only daughter, with the miracle. I wanted to call her name, to see her face light up with the kind of joy only a daughter can show for her father. Instead, I froze in the hallway. Her voice carried sharp and unfiltered, because she thought I couldn't hear. "God, that old burden is back home again," she said. My heart slammed against my ribs. A single sentence spoken with irritation hit harder than any construction accident ever could. I pressed my back to the wall, unwilling to believe. Surely I'd misheard. My ears had only just healed. Maybe the words were distorted. But then Chris's voice followed, calm and casual. At least the insurance money helped with his bills. Could have been worse. Their conversation sliced through me with the cruelty of truth. I stood there, invisible in my own home, the man who had paid for Jessie's college, her wedding, even her rent when she needed it. A father reduced to a burden. My legs trembled, but I forced myself not to move. I had to know more. I had to understand exactly what my daughter and her husband were planning. "I just want this over with," Jessie sighed. 3 weeks of pretending to care about his every need. I'm exhausted. The words stole the air from my lungs. Pretending. Every smile, every note she had scribbled for me while I sat in silence, it had all been an act. I gripped the wall so hard my knuckles went white, holding myself upright as the ground seemed to tilt beneath me. They weren't done. Sunset Manor has good reviews, Jessie continued, her tone almost businesslike. It's not too expensive, and the insurance settlement should cover the deposit. Chris chuckled. Once he's out, we can finally start the renovations. Knock down that wall between the dining room and the living room. Realtor said it could add 50 grand. My throat tightened, my chest hollowed. They were speaking of my home, the place Margaret and I had built our lives in, as if it were already theirs to tear apart. My wife had taken her last breath in that house, and here were Jessie and Chris carving it up like scavengers. For a moment I wished my ears had never healed, that silence had remained my shield. But the truth was here now, unavoidable, and I had a choice: collapse under the weight of betrayal or turn their arrogance into my strength. That was the instant I decided. If my daughter and her husband believed I was still deaf, then so be it. They would keep talking, plotting, underestimating me. And I would be listening, every word, every plan, every lie. They had no idea that the old burden was about to become their worst mistake. I stood in that narrow hallway, my body pressed against the familiar wallpaper, but I felt like an intruder in my own home. Every sound, the scrape of a chair leg, the clink of Jessie's glass against the table, was clearer than crystal. And every word they spoke cut deeper than the last. The realtor said the place could fetch at least $470 after the mortgage. Jessie continued, her voice carrying with ease. That would give us a solid down payment for the Whitefish property. Whitefish. They had already picked out where they'd move as if I were some hurdle to step over on their way to a brighter life. Chris leaned back in his chair. I could hear it creak under his weight. Think he suspects anything, he asked. Jessie's laugh was sharp, the kind she used when she felt clever. Are you kidding? He can't hear a thing. Poor old man just nods while I write him notes. Honestly, it's pathetic. Pathetic. I'd heard plenty of insults in my day on construction sites, in barroom arguments, even whispered after Margaret's funeral when people questioned why Jessie wasn't there. But nothing had ever stung like that word coming from my only child. I wanted to storm into the kitchen, slam my fist on the table, and demand an explanation. But years of raising a daughter had taught me patience. Sometimes silence teaches more than shouting ever could. So I steadied my breathing and made a decision I would play their game. I would act the part of the grateful, confused old man who couldn't hear. And in doing so, I would gather every weapon I needed. Carefully, I stepped into the kitchen. I made my footsteps heavier, slower, like someone still unsteady after weeks of recovery. Their reaction was immediate. Jessie shot up from her chair, her face blooming with what looked like genuine concern. "Dad," she said brightly, her voice dipped in sugar. "How are you feeling? You look tired." Just minutes before she had called me a burden. Now she held my arm as if I were her most precious treasure. Chris spoke louder than necessary. "Hey there, Thomas. How was the appointment?" His grin looked sincere, but I'd just heard him call me pathetic. I pointed to my ears, feigning confusion, and Jessie hurried to grab her notepad. She scribbled quickly, "Doctor says hearing might return soon. Wonderful news." She handed me the page with wide eyes and a soft squeeze of my shoulder. I forced my lips into a shaky smile, nodding as if her note had lifted a weight from my chest. Inside, though, I was cataloging every twitch, every false gesture, every ounce of her performance. She was good, almost convincing. But I had heard the truth already, and once you know the truth, the performance looks like theater. As they carried on their charade, offering me soup, patting my back, writing questions about whether I was hungry, I felt as though poison was sliding down my throat, but I swallowed it quietly. They thought they were fooling me when, in fact, they were giving me everything I needed. Every fake smile, every carefully written note, every exaggerated display of love was nothing more than evidence, and I intended to use it. When I look back on that evening, what strikes me most is not Jessie's cruelty, but her skill. She played the part of a devoted daughter so well that had I not overheard her earlier, I might have believed every word. She leaned close, writing notes in her neat looping script, asking if I wanted tea, patting my shoulder, and calling me Dad with a tenderness that felt like theater. It was a performance carefully rehearsed, and I was the audience she thought too deaf to applaud. Chris joined in, his voice unnecessarily loud, the way people talk when they assume you can't hear. "We should look into care options for when you're stronger," he said. Then Jessie quickly scribbled, "Just temporary, Dad. Only until you're fully recovered." I nodded slowly, letting my eyes widen like a man who thought this was kindness. Inside, though, my gut twisted. Their words about temporary care were a polished mask, but I had already heard the truth. Sunset Manor wasn't a stop on the road to recovery. It was the final destination. I sat at the table, sipping the tea Jessie placed before me, pretending to savor the warmth while I studied her face. She widened her eyes to look excited when I smiled at her note, and Chris nodded emphatically, as though agreeing with a father-in-law he secretly despised. Their entire act was flawless, but it was hollow. Hollow gestures, hollow words, hollow love. I forced myself to play along. I pointed at the refrigerator, then made a confused expression when Chris responded verbally. Jessie rushed to write down, "Yes, there's soup inside. Do you want some?" I nodded gratefully. She beamed as though my acceptance of her care was proof of her devotion. In reality, each gesture felt like swallowing poison. The longer I sat there, the heavier the silence inside me grew. I thought about Margaret, how she used to twist her wedding ring when she was worried. She'd warned me once in her gentle way that Jessie might not always be trustworthy. She comes around when she needs something. Thomas, she'd whispered, tired from the treatments that eventually claimed her life. I had brushed it aside, convinced our daughter's heart was good. Now I saw how wrong I'd been. When the performance wound down, I scribbled my own note, tired, going to rest. Jessie hugged me tightly, too tightly, as though she could squeeze sincerity into the embrace. Of course, Dad. Rest as much as you need. Her voice was honey again, but I'd already tasted the venom underneath. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Chris's voice drop to a whisper behind me. He bought it completely. My steps were steady, my face calm, but inside my chest a storm gathered. They thought the show was working. They thought I was the gullible old man who'd drink his tea and nod while they mapped out his future. What they didn't realize was that their own performance had become my greatest weapon. They were digging a pit for me, and I had already decided they'd be the ones to fall into it. Upstairs in the bedroom, Margaret and I had shared for 30 years. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed photo on my nightstand. It was Jessie's college graduation. Her arm was around my shoulders, her smile radiant, her words from that day still echoing in my memory. I couldn't have done this without you, Dad. I remembered the pride that swelled in my chest, the tears Margaret fought to hide as she whispered, "She's going to make us proud." But sitting there now, the photograph looked like a cruel joke. The young woman in that picture, the one who promised she'd never forget what I'd done for her, was gone if she'd ever truly existed. I picked up Margaret's wedding ring from the small dish on the nightstand. The metal felt cool against my fingers, grounding me. Margaret used to twist that ring whenever she was thinking deeply, her way of sorting through the chaos of life. I could almost hear her voice. "Thomas, don't let your kindness be mistaken for weakness." She had seen through Jessie long before I allowed myself to. I was blinded by the hope that a daughter's love was unconditional, but Margaret had sensed the truth. From the vent near the stairs, their voices drifted up clearly. The house carried sound well. I had overseen the renovations myself years ago, back when I was still on the job site, every day strong and steady. Now that same design gave me an advantage. I leaned closer, careful not to creak the floorboards, and listened. Jessie's voice was firm, almost businesslike. "Sunset Manor is $4,800 a month. Medicare will cover most if we get the right evaluation." My hand tightened around the banister until my knuckles turned white. They weren't just planning, they were budgeting. Chris's reply was calm, almost casual. "After the mortgage, the house will net at least $320,000. That's more than enough for a down payment on Whitefish." My heart sank. My home, where Margaret and I had built our life, was nothing more than a dollar figure to them. Then Jessie said something that snapped the last thread of denial. "We need to establish a pattern of incompetence. Henderson owes me a favor. He can write whatever evaluation we need." I nearly dropped Margaret's ring. They weren't just planning to tuck me away, they were plotting to forge documents to erase me. I moved quickly back to the bed as Jessie's footsteps approached the stairs. She knocked lightly on my door before stepping in, holding a steaming mug. "Dad, I brought you tea," she said, her voice dripping with concern. She set it on my nightstand, right beside Margaret's ring. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, my wife's memory displaced by my daughter's deception. I forced a weary smile, picked up the notepad, and wrote, "Thank you. You're so good to me." The words felt like poison in my hand. Jessie smiled, patting my shoulder with feigned affection. Rest as much as you need, Dad. Chris and I are taking care of everything. When she left, I lay back staring at the ceiling. The daughter I thought I knew was gone. What remained was a stranger wearing Jesse's face, a woman willing to destroy her father for a house and a bank account. But I wasn't helpless. I wasn't confused. I was angry. And anger, I realized, could be sharpened into something far more useful than grief. After Jesse left my room, I sat still for a long time, Margaret's ring warm in my hand, my mind racing with clarity I hadn't felt in years. They thought I was beaten down by age, by silence, by grief. What they didn't know was that those weeks of deafness had taught me something priceless: how to observe without distraction, how to listen with more than just my ears. Now, with my hearing restored, every whisper in this house became ammunition. I moved carefully into the hallway, testing each step. I remembered which boards groaned and which ones held firm knowledge from decades of living here. Settling near the heating vent by the stairs, I could hear them perfectly in the kitchen. Chris's voice came first. Sunset Manor at $4,800 a month. Henderson says he can do the evaluation next week if needed. Jesse's reply was quick-clipped. Let's not wait too long. If Dad suddenly signs something else, we'll lose everything. The sheer arrogance of it nearly made me laugh. They assumed I was powerless, too broken to defend myself. In reality, they were laying out their scheme in perfect detail for me to hear. I didn't need to guess. I didn't need to wonder. They were building my case for me one greedy word at a time. I returned to my study, the room where Margaret and I had balanced checkbooks, planned vacations, and argued lovingly about wallpaper choices. Opening the filing cabinet, I pulled out folders, each one a record of my sacrifices: Jessie's tuition payments, her wedding receipts, the loans I'd forgiven, the down payment on her first apartment. Evidence of a lifetime of giving stacked neatly in rows. All of it had been love, or what I thought was love. But love doesn't call you a burden. Love doesn't forge papers to lock you away. From the drawer, I slid out a business card: Robert Henley, attorney at law. He had helped with Margaret's estate years ago. He had urged me to update my will, and I had always said, later. Now later had arrived. I slipped the card into my pocket, feeling its weight like a weapon. Tomorrow morning, I would call him. Tonight, I would continue to listen, to let Jesse and Chris believe they were safe. Their voices floated up again, louder this time, careless in their confidence. Jesse laughed, a sharp, triumphant sound. He's completely clueless, just a deaf old man drinking tea like a good patient. Chris added, by next month, this house will be ours. I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. Every instinct screamed to march downstairs and reveal the truth. But I held back because silence was stronger than rage. Silence gave me time. Silence gave me power. And silence, I realized, would give me revenge. When I finally lay down in my bed, the house felt different, no longer a home, but a battlefield. They believed they were playing me, but in truth, I was already 3 steps ahead. Margaret had been right. Kindness mistaken for weakness is dangerous, and they were about to discover just how dangerous it could be. The next morning, Jessie's performance began the moment I shuffled into the kitchen. She smiled sweetly, speaking louder than necessary. Good morning, Dad. I made your favorite breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, just the way Margaret used to make. Except the taste was hollow, and the sweetness in Jessie's voice was faker than the pearls she wore around her neck. I pointed to my ears, pretending confusion, and she quickly scribbled on her notepad. Chris and I are going shopping this morning. Will you be okay alone? I wrote back. Yes, thank you for taking such good care of me. She beamed at the words, kissed my forehead, and left with Chris at her side. Their car pulled out of the driveway at 10:45 sharp. I watched from the window as Jessie adjusted her sunglasses, laughing at something Chris said. To them, this house was already theirs. To me, it had just become the ground on which I'd launch my counterattack. 15 minutes later, I picked up the phone. Old habits from my years in engineering stuck with me. Always double-check the measurements. Always wait a beat before committing. At exactly 11:00, I dialed Robert Henley's office. He answered on the second ring. Henley Law Office. Robert, I said, my voice steady, it's Thomas Brooks. I need to change my will immediately. There was silence on the line for a moment. Thomas, I thought you were experiencing hearing difficulties. It's complicated, I replied. But I've never been more certain about anything in my life. Can you see me today? He hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Come in by 11:30, we'll take care of it. The drive downtown felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. I no longer felt like a victim waiting for the hammer to fall. I was taking back control. Robert's office sat in an old Victorian on Alder Street, the same place he'd guided me through Margaret's estate years before. Walking in, I felt steadier than I had in months. Robert greeted me with his firm handshake and sharp eyes. Thomas, I need to ask, are you experiencing any confusion or memory issues? Anything Jessie might use against you? I met his gaze. I'm as clear as I've ever been. Draw up the papers, Robert. Everything goes to Michael. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it. Jessie gets $1,000 for reasons she will understand. His brows rose slightly, but he didn't press. For the next hour, we worked through the details. The house valued at $450,000 savings, at $180,000 investments, another $120,000. Roughly $750,000 in total secured now against Jessie's greed. At 1:15, the will was signed, witnessed, and filed. When I left Robert's office, a sealed copy rested in my hand. I drove home slowly, savoring every turn, every stoplight, every sound of the world around me. I wasn't just Thomas Brooks, the man Jessie called a burden. I was a father who had just taken the first step in teaching his daughter the hardest lesson of her life. By the time I returned home, the house was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine again, if only for a few hours. I walked straight into the kitchen and set the sealed envelope on the counter, right where Jessie always dumped her shopping bags. I positioned it carefully, like bait in a trap, knowing her curiosity would do the rest. Then I settled into my recliner in the living room, newspaper in hand, listening to the clock tick toward their return. At 2:45, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the driveway. Shopping bags rustled as they climbed the porch steps, Jessie's laughter ringing high, carefree, like someone who thought the future was already hers. The front door opened, followed by silence, then the sharp intake of breath that told me Jessie had seen the envelope. Paper tore, pages rustled. Then came her voice, jagged with panic. "Chris, get in here. Now." I didn't move. I let the newspaper cover my face, my body, the picture of a tired old man napping in his chair. Their voices carried through the kitchen. "That old bastard changed his will," Jessie hissed. "What do you mean, changed it?" Chris's tone sharpened with alarm. "It's dated today. Today, Chris, everything house savings investments goes to Michael. And me, a measly $1,000. Her voice cracked. $700,000 gone. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of frantic pacing. Then Chris muttered, "There has to be a way to fight this. Mental incompetence, undue influence, something." Jessie laughed bitterly. "Oh, there's more. Listen to this. For reasons she will understand. He knows Chris. He knows everything." I nearly smiled behind my newspaper. Those 7 words were worth more than any lawyer's brief. They told Jessie I'd seen through her mask, that her performance of the caring daughter hadn't fooled me. Chris swore under his breath, "That can't be possible. He can't hear a damn thing." We've been talking right in front of him for weeks. Then explain this, Jesse snapped. Papers slammed against the counter. Explain how he got himself to a lawyer and signed a new will without us knowing. Silence stretched. I could almost feel their fear rising thick as smoke in the room. Finally, Chris spoke again, his voice quieter. Maybe he's not as out of it as we thought. Maybe he's testing us. The thought made Jesse's voice rise in panic. Testing us by pretending to be deaf while we planned his future. I let the words hang in the air, savoring the irony. They were right. I was testing them. And every word they spoke was another failure, another mark against them. Finally, Jesse's footsteps moved toward the living room. "Dad," she called softly, her voice sugary again, the panic hidden beneath a false layer of concern. "Dad, are you awake?" I stirred slowly, lowering the newspaper just enough to reveal my tired eyes. "Oh, Jesse," I said with a smile. "Did you have a good shopping trip?" Her face froze, caught between rage and fear. For the first time, my daughter realized the game had changed. Jessie's face twitched as though her muscles couldn't decide between a smile and a grimace. She perched on the arm of my chair, her hand sliding down my sleeve in a gesture that once might have been genuine. "Of course we had a good trip, Dad," she said brightly, but I could hear the strain under every syllable. Her eyes darted to Chris, who stood stiff in the doorway, his jaw clenched tight. I tilted my head, touched my ears, and frowned with confusion. "Go somewhere?" I asked slowly, my voice uncertain. Jesse's shoulders relaxed, thinking the old man act was still intact. "Never mind, Dad," she said sweetly. "You should rest. You've been through so much." Her words dripped with honey, but I'd already tasted the venom. I let myself sag back into the recliner, feigning fatigue while their whispers hissed in the kitchen. "He's up to something," Jesse muttered. Chris's voice was sharp. "If he changed the will today, we need Henderson tomorrow, not next week." My heart kicked hard in my chest, but my face stayed still behind the newspaper. Henderson, the doctor friend Jesse had mentioned, was the key. They planned to brand me incompetent, erase me with paperwork. I shifted in my chair, allowing the newspaper to droop slightly, just enough to see Jessie re-enter the living room. She bent toward me, her eyes wide with false concern. "Dad, you didn't make any phone calls today, did you? Or go anywhere?" I blinked at her, my expression confused. "Phone calls, sweetheart. You know I can't hear well enough for calls." Relief washed over her face, but it was shallow, nervous. "Right," she said quickly. "I forgot. Silly me." She turned to Chris, whispering harshly. "Either he's the best actor in the world, or we're missing something." Their suspicion told me I'd rattled them. Good. Let them stew in doubt. The more they scrambled, the sloppier they'd become. That night, I sat at my desk, with the new will lying flat before me. The words glared back like a promise etched in stone. To Michael Brooks, my son, I leave my entire estate. For Jessie, only $1,000 and a line she could never erase for reasons she will understand. I imagined her face when she read those words again, when the truth became undeniable. For years, she had taken my generosity as entitlement. College tuition, wedding bills, the down payment on her first apartment, every sacrifice I made blurred into obligation in her mind. She never said thank you. She just said more. Now, for the first time in decades, the scales were balanced. I placed the will back in its envelope and set it on the desk. From the vent above, Jessie's voice carried faintly. "Tomorrow, Chris. 10 o'clock. Henderson will declare him unfit, and this whole nightmare will be over." The silence of my room wrapped around me, not heavy and suffocating like those weeks of deafness, but sharp and powerful. They thought silence was weakness. But silence was the weapon they'd handed me, and I was about to use it. After Jesse and Chris finally went upstairs, I sat alone in my study, the house heavy with pretense. The will rested in its envelope, a shield I could almost feel humming with power. But I knew paper alone wouldn't stop what Jesse had planned. Henderson's evaluation could turn that will into dust if they succeeded. I needed an ally, someone Jesse couldn't manipulate, and there was only one person left in this world I trusted. I pulled out the cell phone Jesse didn't know I owned, tucked away in the nightstand since Margaret's illness. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number I knew by heart. After a few rings, Michael answered. "Hello." His voice carried both surprise and caution. "Son," I said, steady but low, "it's Dad." There was a pause. "Dad, Jesse said you were having hearing problems. How are you calling me?" I closed my eyes, letting the truth fall carefully. "Michael, I can hear perfectly. My hearing came back 3 days ago. But I haven't told your sister because the first words I heard at home were her calling me a burden." The line went silent. Then Michael exhaled sharply. "Are you certain every word, son? She and Chris plan to put me in Sunset Manor. They've already calculated the sale of this house, even the down payment on property in Whitefish. And Henderson is going to forge medical records to declare me incompetent." Michael swore under his breath. "Jesus, Dad. That's not just betrayal, that's fraud. That's elder abuse." "I know," I replied. "That's why I changed my will today. Everything is yours now, Michael. The house, the savings, all of it. Jessie will get a single dollar and a note she'll understand." Michael's voice cracked. "Dad, I don't know what to say. I should have been there more. I should have seen this coming." "You have your own family, son," I said gently. "But I need you now. Jessie will call you tomorrow. She'll try to convince you I'm losing my mind, that the will is invalid. I need you to play along. Tell her you're worried about me. Let her believe you might support the evaluation." There was hesitation on the line. "You want me to lie to her? I want you to give her enough rope to hang herself," I answered firmly. "Every word she says, every lie, every manipulation, document it. We may need it." Michael drew in a long breath. "All right, Dad. If this is what it takes to protect you, I'll do it. But promise me one thing, don't confront them too soon. If they feel cornered, there's no telling how far they'll go. Don't worry about me." I said, my voice steady. I survived 30 years on construction sites and 3 years of grief. I can handle one greedy daughter and her husband. When I ended the call, the weight in my chest lifted slightly. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Jessie thought she was tightening a noose around my neck. What she didn't realize was that she had just stepped into her own trap, and Michael and I would be the ones holding the rope. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been thin, my mind replaying every word I'd overheard through the heating vent. Downstairs, the house creaked softly as Jessie moved about her performance of the caring daughter already underway. I stayed in my room listening. Chris's muffled voice drifted up from the kitchen. Henderson confirmed. "Tomorrow, 10 sharp. He'll run the evaluation right here." Jessie's tone was brisk, stripped of any pretense now that she thought I was still asleep. "Perfect. The sooner we get those papers, the sooner we can contest the will. Once Dad's declared incompetent, Michael won't stand a chance. The court will throw that new will out." I gripped the edge of my nightstand until my fingers ached. They weren't just planning to steal my house, they were planning to erase me entirely, to reduce me to a confused patient, incapable of deciding his own fate. But they had no idea I had already prepared my counterstrike. By mid-morning, Jessie knocked on my door, her voice syrupy sweet. "Dad, we're heading out for errands. Soup's in the fridge if you get hungry. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes as if groggy. I nodded and forced a grateful smile, then pointed at my ears and shrugged. She scribbled quickly on her notepad, "Back around 2. Don't overexert yourself." I waved, pretending touched by her concern. She leaned down, kissed my forehead, and left. The door closed behind them, their car backing out of the driveway. I didn't move until I heard the engine fade into the distance. Then, with deliberate steps, I carried the will from my study and placed it squarely on the kitchen counter, again this time, not as bait, but as a reminder. They wanted to challenge my sanity. I would make sure there was no question of it. Every move I made from here forward would be measured careful, impossible to discredit. I sat in my recliner, pen and notepad in hand, documenting everything I remembered from the past few days: Jesse's words about Sunset Manor, Chris's chuckle over the renovations, their calculation of the mortgage payoff, Henderson's name. Each detail was written in my own hand, dated, signed. Evidence. If they wanted to drag me into court, I'd walk in not as a confused old man, but as a father prepared to expose the rot in his own family. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "She called me last night, told me you've lost your mind. I played along like you asked. She'll call again today." Good. The plan was working. Jessie thought she was manipulating her brother, but she was only tightening the snare. By the time their car pulled back into the driveway at 2, I was ready. The will was on the counter, my notes tucked safely away, my resolve hardened like steel. Tomorrow at 10, Henderson would come with his lies and his papers. Jessie believed it would be the day she won. But for me, it was the day the game shifted entirely. I wasn't waiting to be declared incompetent. I was preparing to show them all just how dangerous it is to underestimate a man who's been silent too long. That evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised lavender, I heard Jessie's voice rise in the kitchen, sharp and quivering. She was on the phone. My hearing, sharper than ever now, caught every word through the vent above the stairwell. "Michael, thank God you answered. No, everything is not okay. Dad has completely lost his mind." Her voice cracked in practiced sorrow. "He changed his will today. Everything goes to you now. The house, the savings, everything. He left me practically nothing." I leaned against the wall, eyes shut, my grip on the banister steady. She was doing exactly what I expected, spinning lies, dressing herself in sacrifice. "I gave up my whole life to take care of him," she continued. "Moved in here, sacrificed everything, and this is how he repays me. Michael, you can't accept this. You need to refuse the inheritance. It should be split fairly." Her tone was convincing, too convincing. If I hadn't already overheard her gloating about my so-called incompetence, I might have believed her. Jessie had always been skilled at twisting truth into something that served her. It was how she'd talked me into paying her college loans, her wedding, her endless emergencies. Through the phone, I caught faint bits of Michael's reply. He was calm, cautious, asking questions she didn't like. "Good reasons." What good reasons could he possibly have? Jessie snapped her mask, slipping. "I'm his daughter. I've been taking care of him while you sit comfortably in Seattle. And now he disinherits me. He's senile, Michael. That's the only explanation." The lie landed like a stone in my gut, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. She was giving me exactly what I needed: proof of intent, proof of manipulation. Then her voice turned colder. "If you accept that will, Michael, you're complicit in taking advantage of a diseased mind. You think a judge won't see through it? He'll throw it out." There was a pause then, the sound of her temper snapping. "How dare you judge me, Michael? You're never here. One phone call a month, Maybe a Christmas card, and suddenly you know what Dad needs. The phone slammed down hard against the counter. Silence followed, broken only by Jesse's uneven breathing. Then Chris's voice, low and tight. "What did he say? He's not on my side," Jesse hissed. "But it doesn't matter. Henderson's evaluation will fix everything. By Friday, Dad will be legally incompetent, and that won't stand." My hands curled into fists at my sides. They weren't slowing down, they were accelerating. I stepped quietly back into my room, heart pounding not with fear, but with resolve. They thought their counterattack was clever, but desperate people make mistakes. Jessie had shown her hand too soon, and Michael was already in on the plan. I sat on the bed, Margaret's photo on the nightstand, watching me like a silent witness. "Don't worry, love," I whispered. "They think they're winning, but tomorrow they'll learn who they're truly up against." The following afternoon, I moved through the house with purpose. Jesse and Chris had gone shopping again, likely preparing for their little victory celebration after tomorrow's evaluation. I knew exactly how to use those hours. In the basement, tucked away in storage, were 2 leather suitcases Margaret and I had used for our anniversary trips to Yellowstone. I carried them upstairs, dust clinging to the brass clasps, and set them on the couch in the living room. Then I began to pack, not my belongings, but theirs. Jessie's designer blouses, her jewelry box, even the wedding dress she insisted on storing in my guest closet, all went neatly inside. Chris's golf clubs, his laptop, his tailored suits, they followed into the second case. Piece by piece, I folded away the life they'd built under my roof, a life they had filled with contempt and calculation. Every item felt like a silent accusation. You lived here, you schemed here, and now you're leaving here. By the time I zipped the suitcases shut, the house looked different, cleaner, lighter, as if Margaret herself had finally swept out the shadows. I placed both cases squarely in the center of the living room, impossible to ignore. Then I sat in my recliner, newspaper in hand, and waited. At 1:45, the familiar rumble of their Ford Escape pulled into the driveway. Shopping bags rustled, their laughter echoing as the key turned in the lock. The door opened, and then silence. A sharp silence broken only by Jessie's gasp. "Chris, what the hell?" Her footsteps rushed across the hardwood. "Dad," she shouted, her voice climbing in panic. "What is this?" I lowered the newspaper, slowly savoring the sight of her pale face, her trembling hands hovering over the suitcases. "Oh," I said calmly. "Just thought it was time for some packing." Her relief was immediate, almost giddy. She laughed, her voice bubbling with disbelief. "Chris, do you hear that? He's finally ready. He's going to Sunset Manor." Chris's face lit up with relief. "I can't believe it. Finally. We won't even need Henderson." He paced the room, his words spilling like champagne. "We can start renovations next week. Knock down that wall, maybe redo the kitchen. By summer, this place will be worth $700,000. They were celebrating. Actually celebrating what they thought was my surrender. I let them laugh, let them bask in their imagined victory. Then, with deliberate calm, I folded the newspaper and placed it on the side table. "No," I said, my voice clear, strong, and perfectly audible. "You are leaving my house." Jessie froze, her smile collapsing into horror. Chris staggered back a step, eyes wide. "Thomas," he stammered, how long have you been able to hear?" I stood slowly, each movement deliberate, steady, filled with the strength of years they thought I'd lost. "Every single word since I came home from the hospital," I replied. The room went still, heavy as stone. Their faces drained of color, their triumph dissolving in an instant. For the first time, it was Jessie who looked powerless, and me who held all the cards. Jessie's eyes filled with tears so quickly, it might have fooled anyone else. She staggered toward me, hands trembling, her voice breaking. "Dad, you hurt us? Oh, please, you don't understand. We were stressed, scared. I didn't mean those things." She clutched at my arm as though she could anchor herself to my forgiveness. But I had already heard too much to be swayed by tears. "Didn't mean it." My voice cut through her sobs. "I heard you, Jessie. Every word. That old burden. Pathetic old man. You planned my future as if I were already gone. You even priced this house like it was a piece of furniture at an estate sale." Her sobs grew louder, more dramatic. She dropped to her knees beside my recliner, pressing her forehead against my hand. "I was just tired, Dad. 3 weeks of taking care of you, I wasn't myself. Please, you know I love you." But I had heard the sound of her laughter when she thought I couldn't hear. I remembered her triumphant tone when she told Chris, "By next month, this house will be ours." That wasn't exhaustion speaking. That was greed. Chris tried to step in, his tone defensive. "Thomas, you're overreacting. We were frustrated, that's all. Families say things in private they don't mean." I turned my gaze on him, steady and cold. "Private? You mean the private plans with your doctor friend to forge medical records? The private conversations about Medicare covering Sunset Manor? The private calculations of how much my house would net you after the mortgage?" Chris's jaw snapped shut. His eyes darted to Jessie, then back to me, realizing he couldn't spin this into a misunderstanding. Jessie's tears flowed harder, but her voice slipped for just a moment, sharp and calculating beneath the sobs. "Dad, please. We were only trying to do what's best for you." I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was almost a growl. "What's best for me? To lock me away, strip me of my name, my dignity, my independence, to sell the home where your mother took her last breath so you could buy property in Whitefish." The mention of Margaret broke whatever performance Jessie was clinging to. Her face paled, her crying faltered, and for the first time I saw the mask drop. I straightened, my voice firm. "No more lies, no more tears. Every gesture you've made these last 3 weeks, the notes, the hugs, the meals, was a performance. And I've seen it for what it is. Poison in every smile. Deception in every word." Her sobs faded to silence. She looked up at me, eyes hard now, her voice stripped of all sweetness. "Fine," she hissed. "Believe what you want, but you'll regret this, Dad. You'll regret pushing your only daughter away." I pointed at the suitcases, my voice calm as stone. "No, Jessie. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner." The living room was still the only sound, the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. For once, Jessie had no words that could save her. Chris had been silent too long, his face shifting from pale shock to a slow, simmering red. Finally, he stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides, his voice hard with anger. "You can't just kick us out, Thomas. We gave up our apartment to take care of you. We've sacrificed for you." I turned my eyes to him, steady as a steel beam. "You didn't give up your apartment out of love or duty. You moved in here because you couldn't afford rent. Don't paint greed as sacrifice." Chris's jaw tightened, his composure unraveling. "We had plans for this place. Plans to make it worth more, to sell," I cut in. "Not to build a home. To cash out my life, my memories, your mother-in-law's final years, as if they were chips at a poker table. Don't lie to me, Chris. I heard you both loud and clear." Jessie, still kneeling, tried to pivot again. "Dad, listen to me. Chris pushed me into those conversations. I was just overwhelmed, but I never meant." I snapped my gaze to her, my voice sharp. "You called me a burden, Jessie. You. You schemed with him about selling this house, about forging papers, about hiding me away like some broken thing. Don't you dare blame someone else for words that came out of your own mouth." Her face crumpled, not in sorrow, but in rage. She stood quickly, wiping her tears, as if they'd been nothing more than a tool she no longer needed. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, we planned to sell this place. Yes, we were going to use Henderson, because your old dad, because you can't take care of yourself anymore, and someone has to think about the future." Her bluntness landed like a punch, but I didn't flinch. Old doesn't mean weak. Old doesn't mean worthless. And it damn sure doesn't mean I'll hand you my life on a silver platter. Chris slammed his fist against the wall, the sound echoing through the living room. "You'll regret this, Thomas. You think you can play tough, but you can't live alone forever. When you need help, don't come crawling back to us." I felt a surprising calm settle over me. I've already lived 3 years alone since Margaret passed, and I'd rather face another 30 in solitude than one more day with snakes under my roof. Their anger flared, but underneath it I saw fear. Fear that their carefully laid plan had unraveled. Fear that the man they dismissed as feeble had stood up taller than they expected. I pointed to the suitcases. "Everything you brought into this house is packed. You can walk out with it, or the police can carry you out without it. Your choice." Jesse's face twisted. Chris's fists clenched tighter, but neither moved. For the first time, they understood that the old man they'd conspired against wasn't backing down, and their mask of sacrifice, of sweetness, of control, was cracking beyond repair. The air in the living room was thick like the seconds before a storm breaks. Jessie stood rigid, her face streaked with tears that had long since dried, her eyes burning with fury. Chris's fists were clenched, his chest heaving as though he might strike out at any second. Yet I remained calm, steadier than I'd felt in years. Silence had been my curse for 3 weeks, but now it was my weapon. Chris jabbed a finger at me. "We'll contest this will. No judge will believe you disinherited your only daughter. They'll say you're senile, that you weren't in your right mind." I met his glare with a faint smile. "Good luck with that. My lawyer has records of every conversation I've had with you two these past days." That wasn't true, but the bluff worked instantly. Chris's face drained of color, his anger replaced with unease. You recorded us," Jessie's voice shook, panic flickering in her eyes. I leaned closer, my tone cold. "I didn't need to. I heard you. Every scheme, every insult, every calculation. But if I did record you, would you really want to risk finding out in front of a judge?" Her composure cracked. For the first time, she looked like a child again, cornered, scared, scrambling for excuses. "Dad, please. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. We'll call Henderson, cancel everything, prove we're on your side." I shook my head slowly. "No, Jessie. You've already proven whose side you're on your own." Chris's temper flared again. "You think you can just throw us out like garbage? We've been living here for months. We have rights." "Rights," I let out a bitter laugh. "You're not tenants. You're not caretakers. You're squatters who took advantage of a father's grief. And now it ends." For a long moment, no one moved. The clock ticked on the mantel. My heart beat steady, not with fear, but with certainty. I had taken the first true step toward freedom. Finally, Jessie bent down, grabbed the handle of her suitcase, and lifted it with shaking hands. "Fine," she spat, her voice raw. "We'll go. But don't think you'll win in the end. You'll be all alone, Dad. And when you realize you need us, it'll be too late." Chris yanked up his own suitcase, his jaw tight with unspoken rage. Together they moved toward the door, their belongings dragging heavily behind them. At the threshold, Jessie turned back, her eyes cold and unfamiliar. "You'll regret this." I met her gaze without flinching. "No, Jessica. The only thing I regret is that I didn't see who you really were sooner." The door slammed shut behind them, rattling the frame. For a long moment I stood there in the silence of my own home, the echo fading like the end of a battle. But this wasn't the end. This was only their retreat. I knew Jessie. I knew her ambition, her rage. She wouldn't let go so easily. Tomorrow morning, Henderson would arrive thinking he had a role to play in her scheme. That was fine. I'd be ready. The tables had turned, and the next move was mine. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I brewed coffee the way Margaret liked it, black, strong enough to stand a spoon upright, then sat at the kitchen table with the new will in front of me. Today wasn't about sentiment. It was about survival. At 10 o'clock sharp, Henderson would arrive expecting to play his part in Jessie's fraud. But instead of finding a confused old man, he'd meet someone sharper than he imagined. The clock ticked toward 10. I heard Jessie and Chris pacing upstairs, whispering urgently. At 9:55, the crunch of tires sounded on the driveway. A car door slammed. Their voices quickened. "He's here," Jessie hissed. "Just let me do the talking." The knock came firm and confident. I opened the door myself. Dr. Henderson stood there, a man in his 50s with a too-slick smile and an expensive watch. He looked surprised to see me steady on my feet, dressed neatly, clear-eyed. "Mr. Brooks," he said, with professional smoothness. "May I come in?" "Of course," I replied, evenly stepping aside. Jessie hurried down the stairs, her tone syrupy sweet. "Dad, you should sit. Dr. Henderson is here to help." She guided me toward the recliner as though I were a fragile patient. Chris hovered behind her eyes, darting nervously. Henderson opened his briefcase, pulling out papers and a pen. "Now, Thomas, I'll just ask you a few questions to evaluate your memory and reasoning. Standard procedure." I nodded, folding my hands calmly. "Before we start, Doctor, may I see your credentials?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked, then slid a card across the table. I studied it carefully, then set it down. "Good. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Jessie's smile faltered. "Dad, you don't need to." "I do," I interrupted. My voice was calm, but it carried steel. "I want to make sure no one mistakes me for a man who can't think for himself." For a moment, the room was still. Henderson adjusted his tie, then launched into his questions. "What year is it? Who is the president? Can you recall 3 objects I name now and repeat them later?" I answered each question crisply, without hesitation. I recited the date, the president, even the names of the objects he listed. Apple table clock. Then repeated them later with precision. My answers were sharper than his own notes. Henderson's pen scratched faster as his smile thinned. Jessie's hands twisted in her lap. Chris shifted restlessly. This wasn't going the way they had planned. When the test ended, Henderson cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Brooks, I see no evidence of cognitive decline. In fact, you're remarkably sharp." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking onto Jessie's. "Thank you, Doctor. I'd appreciate a copy of your evaluation for my lawyer." Jessie's face drained of color. She tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. Chris swore under his breath. Henderson snapped his briefcase shut, uneasy now, as if he knew he'd stepped into something larger than he was told. The game they thought they controlled had just slipped out of their hands. And for the first time, Jessie realized the trap had closed, not around me, but around her. When Henderson rose to leave, Jessie practically jumped to her feet, panic tightening her voice. "Wait, Doctor. Maybe you should run another test. Dad has been confused sometimes, forgetting things. She cast me a nervous glance, searching for any sign I'd slip back into the role of the bewildered old man. But I didn't. I sat straight, my eyes sharp. Confused, I said evenly. I prepared breakfast this morning, balanced my checkbook, and reviewed last year's tax returns before you arrived. Which part of that sounded confused? Jessie. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Chris stepped forward, desperate now. Look, Doctor, he's good at putting on a show. You can't let one morning fool you. He's been declining. Henderson's eyes flicked between us, unease plain on his face. He wasn't here out of compassion. He was here as a favor, and favors turn sour when they risk exposure. I decided to make sure he felt that risk. Doctor, I said firmly, you should know something. I have already met with my attorney. He'll be expecting a copy of your evaluation. If anything on that report contradicts what you've seen today, it'll be reviewed in court. Under oath. Henderson's pen froze in his hand. His smile slipped completely. Of course, he muttered. My report will reflect my professional findings. I leaned back, satisfied. Good. Because I'd hate to think a man of your reputation would risk perjury for the sake of acquaintances. My eyes shifted deliberately toward Jessie. Her face turned crimson. She looked at Henderson, panic written across her features, but the doctor avoided her gaze. He was already retreating, his confidence gone. Mr. Brooks, you have nothing to worry about. I'll file the evaluation today. With that, he snapped his briefcase shut and left his footsteps quick, his car pulling out of the driveway, like a man escaping a fire. The silence that followed was thunderous. Jessie rounded on me, her composure shattering. What did you do? She screamed. You ruined everything. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the arm of the recliner, my voice calm. No, Jessie. You ruined everything the moment you called me a burden. You ruined everything when you plotted to sell my house, the house your mother and I built for your own gain. Today was simply the moment your lies caught up to you. Chris swore, pacing the room, his fists clenched. You think this is over? We'll still fight you. You can't cut Jessie out like this. No judge will side with you. I pointed toward the suitcases still waiting in the living room, untouched since yesterday. Then take your fight elsewhere. My house is no longer your battleground. For the first time, Jessie's mask of control cracked completely. She looked like someone who had built her future on a foundation of sand and just watched it collapse. Dad, she said quietly, almost pleading, now don't do this. But the truth was, I wasn't doing anything. She had done it all herself. I was merely showing her the consequences. Jessie's voice trembled as she tried to regain control. Dad, you don't understand. We were just worried about you. We wanted to make sure you were safe. Her hands fluttered in front of her like broken wings, a pitiful attempt to stitch back the mask she had worn so carefully. I shook my head. Safe? Is that what you call it? Hiring a doctor to declare me incompetent, selling the house where your mother and I built our life, shipping me off to a nursing home so you could pocket the money. If that's your idea of safe, Jessie, then I'd hate to see what danger looks like. Her lip quivered, but the act didn't last. The tears dried in an instant, replaced by sharpness. Her voice turned cold. Fine. You want the truth, Yana? Yes, we wanted the house. We wanted a future without being tied down to your needs. And we deserve it after everything we've done for you. Chris stepped forward, his face dark, his tone hostile. She's right. We gave up our apartment, our jobs, our lives to take care of you. You should be grateful. Instead, You treat us like criminals." I let out a laugh that sounded harsher than I expected, but it carried years of suppressed disappointment. "Grateful you moved in here because you were drowning in debt. You didn't cook me a meal or sit by my bed. Out of love, you did it out of calculation. And the moment you thought I was deaf, the masks came off." Jesse's eyes narrowed into slits. "You think Michael's any better? He barely calls you. He doesn't visit, but he gets everything while I get scraps. That's not fair." I met her glare with calm certainty. "Michael may not visit often, but he's never once called me a burden. He's never schemed to erase me from my own home. Fairness isn't about dividing money, Jesse. It's about loyalty, and you failed that test long before today." For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of truth pressed heavy in the room. Chris finally broke the silence, his voice harsh and desperate. "We'll contest it in court. Henderson won't save you, but we'll find another way. Judges side with family. They'll say you're unstable, vindictive, punishing your daughter for no reason." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until it was as sharp as a blade. "You underestimate me, Chris. I've spent my life building structures that stand against storms. Do you think I wouldn't know how to build a case strong enough to withstand two liars with empty pockets?" His bravado faltered, his fists unclenching. He looked at Jessie, but she avoided his eyes. The cracks between them were widening. I pointed to the suitcases again, my patience gone. "You've taken advantage of my roof, my food, my trust. But not anymore. Take your things and leave. Today." Jessie opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked small, then not like the triumphant daughter I once believed in, but like a stranger caught in the ruins of her own greed. The weight of my words seemed to press Jessie and Chris into the floor. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint tick of the mantel clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Jessie's face twisted, caught between anger and desperation. Finally, she exploded. "You can't do this, Dad. I'm your daughter. Your only daughter. You don't just throw away your own blood." I met her fury with calm steel. "Blood doesn't give you the right to betray. Loyalty does. Respect does. And you've shown me neither." Her eyes glistened, but this time there were no tears, just venom. "You'll regret this. When you're weak and alone, don't expect us to come back. You'll be begging for help." I rose from my recliner, each step deliberate, steady, strong. "I've already lived 3 years alone since your mother died, and I'd rather spend the rest of my life in solitude than one more day surrounded by liars who call me a burden." Chris stepped forward, trying to reclaim some ground. "You think you're clever. Kicking us out won't stop us. We'll go to court. We'll tell the world you're unstable, that this new will was forced by Michael, that you were manipulated." I leaned closer, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. "Then be prepared to explain the forged medical evaluations. Be prepared to explain why Dr. Henderson walked out of here today, visibly shaken, his report already filed in my favor. Be prepared to explain why my attorney has your names in his notes and your words in mine. Do you really want to gamble in front of a judge with that stacked against you?" Chris's mouth opened, then snapped shut. He looked to Jessie, but she had no answer. The color drained from her face as the truth sank in. They weren't the hunters anymore. They were cornered prey. I pointed toward the suitcases one last time. "You have 10 minutes. Pack whatever dignity you have left and leave. If you're still here when I come back from locking the gate, I'll call the police." Jessie's voice cracked, her composure breaking entirely. "Dad, please. Don't do this to me. I'm your little girl." I stared at her memories, flashing her hand in mine on the first day of school, her tearful face when Margaret died, the way she used to whisper, "I love you, Dad," before bed. But those memories were ghosts now buried under her greed. "No, Jessie," I said softly. "You stopped being my little girl the moment you planned to erase me." Chris grabbed his suitcase with a snarl, muttering curses under his breath. Jessie followed shoulders, shaking her hands, white-knuckled around the handle of her own case. They dragged their belongings across the hardwood, the sound harsh, final. At the threshold, Jessie turned, her voice cold as ice. "You'll see, Dad. One day you'll wish you hadn't pushed us away." I held her gaze unflinching. "And one day you'll realize you lost more than money today. You lost the last shred of my trust." The door slammed shut, echoing like a gavel. The trial between us was over. The silence that followed their departure was unlike any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the heavy void of deafness that had suffocated me weeks ago. It wasn't the tense quiet of listening through vents, waiting for knives of betrayal. This was clean, clear, liberating. I stood at the living room window, watching as Jessie and Chris wrestled their suitcases into the trunk of their Ford Escape. Chris slammed the hatch so hard the glass rattled his curses, muffled by the metal. Jessie sat rigid in the passenger seat, her face turned away from the house jaw, set in a mask of fury. When the engine roared and the car disappeared down the street, it was as if a storm cloud had finally broken and rolled away. I walked slowly through the house, my house savoring every detail. The guest bedroom, once littered with Jessie's designer clothes and jewelry boxes, now lay bare, sunlight streaming through uncluttered windows. The coffee table was free of Chris's magazines, the kitchen counters clear of their shopping bags. For the first time in months, the home Margaret and I had built felt like itself again. In the kitchen, the will still sat where I'd left it, the envelope unbent, its edges sharp. I picked it up, holding it like a declaration of independence. For reasons she will understand. Those words would outlive me. They would remind Jessie every time she thought of me that I had seen through her at last. My phone buzzed. "Michael," his voice was steady when I answered. "Dad." "How did it go?" "They're gone," I said simply. A pause. Then softly, "I'm proud of you." I felt my throat tighten, but not with grief, with relief. "Your mother warned me, Michael. She saw Jessie's selfishness long before I was willing to admit it. I should have listened." "You gave her every chance," he said gently. "That's not weakness. That's love." We talked for a while about his kids, about me visiting Seattle soon. When I hung up, I realized something. For the first time since Margaret passed, I was planning a future instead of simply surviving a present. I made myself a simple supper: eggs and toast, the kind no one ever praised, but no one mocked either. I ate at the kitchen table, watching the sun bleed orange and pink through the windows. No sarcastic comments. No whispered calculations about what my food cost. Just peace. Later, I walked through each room again, pulling down photos of Jessie from the walls and placing them in a drawer. Not to erase her, but to free myself from the reminder of what she'd become. On the mantel I left only pictures that still felt true. Margaret's smile, Michael's children holidays, when love had been real. When I went to bed that night, I lay in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. I closed my eyes, breathing steady, my mind calm. For the first time in years, I slept like a man who had nothing left to fear. As I look back on those weeks, I realized the betrayal itself was not the deepest wound. It was the years I spent confusing generosity with love. I gave Jessie everything: an education, a wedding, a home when she needed it. But each gift became expectation, and when I finally needed care, she saw only a burden standing in the way of her future. That's the danger of enabling. It teaches entitlement instead of gratitude. The day I asked Jesse to leave was not just the day I reclaimed my home, it was the day I reclaimed my dignity. Sometimes family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty by those who stand with you even when there's nothing to gain. Michael may not have been by my side every day, but he never once schemed to erase me. In the end, I discovered that silence can be a weapon, and truth once revealed is stronger than any performance of love. To anyone listening, parents, children, grandparents, ask yourself, are you giving so much that you've taught others to take without thanks? And if you've been betrayed, have you found the strength to set boundaries? I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where family treated you like less than you deserved? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Remember, kindness is strength, but wisdom is knowing who deserves it. Thank you for listening.